Craig, congratulations
Yes,
on the movie. I think it's a really a way of updating what's going on in that world. Was that the purpose of this film? To bring
thank you. And yes, it really was. We've we needed an update. We've kind of come full circle on the American Cowboy story, I think, from mythology to uh now it's really becoming almost a counterculture in some interesting ways. And I really thought it was a good time to kind of dive in there and take a real look at what happens.
the cowboy, the Great Plains and the cowboy world is very uh, I think we're very curious. Like Beyonce just did a tribute to that culture. Pedro Almodovar did a film. And what's going on with cowboy culture, in your opinion, right now?
Well, I think it's always a struggle to survive, right? But I think it's also an antidote to a lot of the popular culture, which people are maybe disillusioned with in some ways. And this is in cowboy culture, it's always about the land. It's about, it's such a rich and vibrant culture, um, with a very long history reaching back into, gosh, you can go all the way back to North Africa, and that presence is still visible today in some of the arts and crafts that surround that world. Um, but economically, it's very difficult because things are moving towards sort of monolithic businesses, and so the family rancher, the family farmer in the cowboy world is sort of I hate to say this, it's fading. It's not dying. It's fading. But they're punching back. They do a valuable service for the rest of us. They help put food on our tables, and so that's kind of what's going on. It's a day-to-day uh, struggle for survival and to honor their own ancestry and traditions, and they're working hard at it.
So, Craig, what is the biggest assumption of cowboy life that is not true, in your
That
opinion?
it's close. I would say this, that it's a closed-minded world. The most open-minded people I've ever met in my life have been cowboys sitting around a room after a day's work, telling jokes and telling stories. It's a very open, and always has been from the beginning. It's very multicultural. It's very open and accepting to other traditions that come into it. And I think that's a bad rap that it gets from the outside, that they're not that.
Do you think Hollywood helped to create a myth
Of
of?
course. Of course, of course. The Hollywood tradition is, it's cowboys versus Indians and these sorts of things. And that was never really the case the way Hollywood promoted it, of course. But in some ways it did a disservice to what actual cowboys and what that actual culture is.
So, Craig, what would you say that Len Babb represents? Len.
Continuity. He represents continuity, uh, adherence to culture, and romanticism of the landscape in its positive ways. Here's a guy that's lived his whole life on the back of a horse and made his living that way and raised 6 children. And he represents the artistry that comes with the culture, the craftsmanship that comes with the culture, the willingness to think about their place in time and in history and in the landscape. And I think he also just represents a really nice guy who is constantly in search of knowledge. And that's something about the cowboy world that also isn't very well understood.
And the Murphy family, what attracted you about this clan, this group of people?
Yeah, the family history, 5 generations doing this in Western United States is very rare. Their family story, the first Murphy brother came over from County Cork in Ireland as a sheep herder. Uh, he was able to sponsor his brother to come over. And so there's the immigrant story, there's the adoption of the Western sort of ethos, and the fact that they've manage to survive economic pressures all this time and actually to grow, and that they're going to hand down this legacy of stewardship and to their grandchildren and hopefully their grandchildren. And that's kind of a remarkable situation these days.
Do you think that the cowboy culture or the cowboys have adapted to modern challenges on their daily
Absolutely.
life?
They have to, or they wouldn't survive. What they've tried to do is to adapt to some of the very modern economic challenges, stewardship practices on the land. You know, they're often accused of destroying the land, which is, it's counterintuitive because their livelihood and the life that they want to live into the future depends on how well they take care of these things. And that includes, you know, the land, the wildlife that's on the land. So they're always learning, trying to get better, which isn't to say they won't acknowledge mistakes. They do acknowledge those. But in order to carry on the traditions and the legacy that are so rich in there, they have to be learning and adapting all the time.
I would like to know the outside circle. Is it the world outside of the Great Plains, or can you tell us a little about what is that concept? If
it comes from a very practical, it's actually a job description. A cowboy on one of these bigger ranches here in the West will be assigned to ride the outside circle, which means he goes the farthest out to find cattle and has a much broader view of the land and the country. And it's a distinguished position. So he's riding, you have to get that to that place through experience and time and seniority. And so he's seeing much of the world, even though he's much farther away from it, if that makes sense.
What is the situation? In your film, there's a cow lady or cowgirl, and what's the situation of women in the cowboy world nowadays?
They are, and I think this has been true for a very long time. Women are equal partners and always have been. Ranch women are highly esteemed, and young ladies have more opportunity now than they ever have if they want to pursue a life in agriculture or in the cowboy world, and are encouraged to do so. Maybe more so than in actual cowboying activities, maybe more so than ever. But these family ranches particularly know that they have to include everyone to continue to survive.
Where does your fascination with this world comes from? Where do you live? Are you a cowboy too, or what?
I was a cowboy in my younger days. I live in Sisters, Oregon now, and I grew up in that world. My grandfather was a working cowboy his entire life. I went out to cowboy, but it seemed like something that I wanted to do very much. And so my fascination with it comes really from the fact that it's one of the only jobs I know that puts you out on the land and working with livestock, and in particular horses. And it gives you a very different window into how the world works. And it's very rewarding at the end of the day. It's like filmmaking. There's a creation process that's going on there all the time. And that fills the soul.
Is this your first documentary? I'm not.
Yes, sir. This is my first one. I'm working on my second one now. And it was a giant learning curve, but I've always thought that if you're going to do something, you just have to go learn how to do it. And fortunately, I had some good help along the way.
Why did you decide to express yourself with visual narrative, with movies or documentaries?
Because I think it reaches people. People don't read anymore, for one thing. So it reaches people. I've always had a fascination with photography, and so this was an opportunity to combine narrative and visuals. And the landscape is a character, and some of these landscapes are just stunning. And putting all that together in one sort of meal was ambitious for me, coming from where I came from, but I think it came together fairly nicely.
Is it? I have a question that might be. Is it complicated to survive as a cowboy? Are big corporations taking over? And the idea
Yes.
of a small farm is still liable. I mean, it's still possible to survive and make a living, or
It's still possible to survive and make a living, but larger corporations are certainly dominating the landscape and homogenizing the way things are done. As a working cowboy, it has always been difficult. Cowboys are nomadic by nature. The job is often nomadic by requirement, but there are plenty of guys still out there doing what has always been done, which is spending a few years on one ranch, going to another ranch. A lot of times the front of the ranch makes it appear like it's a family ranch, but hidden in the paperwork, it's owned by a large corporation somewhere. Which I don't know. It's either good or bad. I vote for families, and I wish that there was some way to keep that going forever, and I just don't know.
do you have cattle right now? Cattle or
No, I don't have any of my own, but I do have horses, and I still get to ride, and I go help the Murphys a couple times a year, and I keep my one whole leg firmly in that world because it's part of who I am too.
and those books, have you read them all?
Everyone that you see, yes.
Really,
I have.
so it looks great.
Thanks, yeah. Well, I try to read as much as I can so I can learn something, you know.
That's great. So thank you very much and congratulations with your movie.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Wonderful. Take care.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to stop recording, okay?